Good morning, grade 10s. This is the third video on parabola. Let's have a look at the effects of the Q and the C on the parabola. Remember last time we filled in the table. You can do substitution or you can use your calculator. And then you plot the points. And then you can see that if the Q, the constant value, is 4, the mother graph shifted upwards. If the Q value was -4, what happened to the mother graph? It shifted downwards. If it was -8, it shifted more downwards there. So let's put all this down conclusion-wise. If you want to look at the effect of the Q, sometimes we write a C. This is your general form. So that means let's have a look at the effect of that Q. If that Q is equal to 0, it means then that the y-intercept will be the origin. And the turning point is then also the origin. If the Q value is greater than 0, so that means any positive number, 1, 2, 3, 4, any positive number, the graph will shift or translate upwards. The y-intercept will be 0 and Q. The turning point will be the same value, 0 and Q. If the Q is less than 0, that means a negative value, -1, -2, -0.5, any negative value, then the graph shifts or translated downwards. So the y-intercept is then again 0 and the Q value, and the turning point will be exactly the same. But if the Q is negative, shifted downwards, translated downwards. If the Q is positive, it's going upwards. If the Q is 0, if there's no number there, it stays on the origin. So that's the effect of the Q. Remember, the A indicating the shape. Let's have a look at terminology. Right, I've mentioned the word turning point. If it's a turning point, that is the point where the parabola will turns or change direction. So if I draw a small little parabola on this side here, then you can see that will be the graph is going downwards. We also say descending. Can you see it's decreasing there? And that on that specific point it turns, so that's the turning point, or change direction, so then it's increasing and going upwards there. So turning point is where the parabola will turns or change direction. This point, because it's a point, has an x coordinate and a y coordinate. The next thing you must remember, it's axis of symmetry. Now what is that? It's a vertical line that divides the parabola so that the one half is the mirror image of the other. So if you look at this above one, the parabola here, can you see that y-axis is in the middle? That's the line of symmetry, because your left hand side is the mirror image of the right and vice versa. So that means if your equation is y equals ax squared plus q, that's your parabola because that's your square quadratic function, then the y-axis will be the line of symmetry or the axis of symmetry. But the equation of the y will be x is equal to 0. Then the next thing you must remember is the minimum value or the maximum value. Now we get a minimum value, that means the lowest value if the a is greater than 0. Remember, if a is greater than 0, you get your smiley face. So that means you've got your lowest value will be the turning point. The maximum value if the a will be less than 0, and that means it's your sad face. So that will be the highest point. But remember, the minimum or the maximum will be the y coordinate of the turning point. So the axis of symmetry will be the x coordinate of the turning point, and minimum or maximum depending on a greater or less than 0. That's giving you the y coordinate of the turning point. To calculate the x-intercept, this is where the graph will intersect the x-axis. Now to calculate that, you make y equal to 0, and because it's quadratic, you will factorize. Y-intercept, this is where the graph will intersect the y-axis, so that means where my x will be equal to 0. And remember, x equal to 0 is your line of symmetry. What will be the domain? The domain will be the set of x values for which the graph has been defined. So domain will be the x values. What will be the range? The set of y values for which the graph has been defined. Then you must remember, increasing is the same as ascending. That's where your graph is going upwards. So that's going upwards there. So if the x increasing this side, the y also is getting more. So that's increasing part of your function. Decreasing or descending means from the turning point you go downwards. So that means the bigger the x will become, the smaller the y will become. So that's decreasing and increasing function. So that's your terminology. Now, the next thing I want to do is to show you how to sketch the parabola without using a table. Remember previous parabolas, we used the table to sketch. You can still use that, but let's have a look. First of all, you determine the shape of the graph, y equals ax squared plus q. Remember, that's your general form of the parabola because you're looking for the square. Square means parabola. Now, if the a value, the coefficient of your x squared is positive, you get a concave up graph. So that means a smiley face. If my a is negative, sad face, your graph will be concave down. So first of all, you look at the shape. Secondly, you can calculate the y-intercept. So that is where x is equal to 0. And remember, that's the same as the q value. To calculate then the x-intercept, you make y equal to 0. Because it's quadratic, you will factorize now. If there are no x-intercepts, if you can't factorize it, use another point. How will you get another point? You use the values of x, you substitute 1 into the equation, or 2 or 3 to get 1 point, and then you use that accordingly. And the fourth step you must take is to find the coordinates of the turning point. Turning point, remember the x value will be the axis of symmetry, which is then x is equal to 0. The y value will be the minimum or maximum, which is the q value, depending on the a value there. And that turning point will also be the y-intercept. So let's do an example on how to sketch use it without a table. If you look at page 15, there is this exercise 2. Now let's have a look. So it's given to you f of x, which is actually implying y, is x squared minus 9. So first of all, you look at the coefficient of x. So that means my a is plus 1. It means smiley face, it's concave up. Right? Secondly, I'm going to calculate the y-intercept. Y-intercept will be the q value, so that's negative 9, and remember that will be 0. If I must calculate now the x-intercept, I will substitute y with 0. So that is my y value, substitute with 0. Can you see it's quadratic there? So I will factorize, that will be difference of squares, and I will get 2x values. Because it's a square there, you'll get 2x values there. Right, and that's your x-intercepts. Now the fourth step is to do the TP, the turning point. And remember we said the turning point will be 0, which is your line of symmetry, and the Q value. So what is the 0 stays here 0, and the Q will be -9. Now on your Cartesian plane, the y and your x-axis there, you just plot the points. X-intercept -3, y-intercept +3, and then -9. Remember the y is the line of symmetry or the axis of symmetry. It means then that this half, the left hand side, will form a mirror image of the right hand side. So that's your parabola there. So we can also ask you to calculate the range and the domain. Now remember, domain will be the x values. To calculate the domain, you put your ruler, place your ruler perpendicular to your negative x-axis. So now you see that's an arrow. So that means you start with -infinity. Then you will see it will intersect your graph. That means you all get x values there. It's defined for all x values until you get that value there. So if the question states interval notation, then you'll see you must write down domain, right? And then you must indicate domain will be the x element. You start with a -infinity to the +infinity. It will be round brackets. Always small to big, minimum, maximum. And that means also you're using the real numbers. You can also write it down like that. If you want to calculate now the range, you place your ruler perpendicular to your negative y-axis. So the first point it's intersecting, it's -9. Can you see it's intersecting? That means it's defined for those values. It's defined for those values. Can you see the arrows? It carries on to +infinity. Because the -9 is included, you will put a block bracket there. So that means then your y will be element. Why do I use the y? Because that's the range. Will be element, block bracket, minimum first, maximum that side, and you close bracket there. Or you can write the interval, the set builder notation, y is greater and equal to -9.